In tonight's episode, we'll be diving into 3 chilling tales from across Asia, and the first one takes us deep into the quiet, forested outskirts of Tai Po Kau in Hong Kong. At first glance, it's just another old bridge, but for locals, Mang Gui Kiu is a place where the living and the dead sometimes share the same path. Its stones have stood through decades of storms, but one night in 1955 changed everything. Since then, strange sightings have plagued this place, pale faces in the dark, footsteps that echo with no one there, and one late-night bus ride that ended with something far worse than an empty seat. So what happened on this bridge that still traps wandering souls in the mist? Let's step onto Mang Gui Kiu, if you dare. The night was unusually still when Mr. Lau, a middle-aged minibus driver, turned off the main road and onto the narrow stretch that led toward Mang Gui Kiu. His shift had dragged on longer than expected, and he was running the late route to the nearby villages. By now, the city lights were far behind him, replaced by thick walls of forest pressing in from both sides. His only company was the soft hum of the engine, the dim yellow glow of the dashboard, and the rhythmic thud of tires against the uneven road. The bridge came into view like a shadow against the darker sky. To anyone else, it was just an old stone crossing, moss-covered, worn from decades of rain. But Mr. Lau knew its name and what it meant. Mang Gui Kiu, also known as the Bridge of the Ghosts. It had once been called Hung Shui Kiu, Flood Bridge, before a night in 1955 turned it into a place of mourning. On that night, a flash flood had swept away a group of teachers and students from St. James's Settlement. 28 lives were lost in the blink of an eye, their cries swallowed by the roaring water. Since then, drivers whispered of strange passengers appearing out of nowhere, only to vanish without a trace. Some even claimed they'd been paid with hell money, currency meant for the dead. Mr. Lau didn't believe all of it, at least not yet. He told himself it was just another night, just another crossing. But as the mist began to curl over the bridge, and the headlights caught something pale moving in the darkness, that quiet, crawling sense that he was no longer alone. As the minibus rolled onto the bridge, the fog thickened, swallowing the world beyond a few meters ahead. Mr. Lau slowed down instinctively, leaning forward over the steering wheel to see through the shifting white veil. That was when he noticed her. At first, she seemed like nothing more than a figure blurred by distance. A woman standing on the far side of the bridge, her back turned to him. Long black hair spilling over a pale dress that fluttered faintly in the damp night air. It wasn't unusual for villagers to walk late at night, but there was something odd about the way she stood, perfectly still. No shifting weight from one foot to the other, no glance over her shoulder at the sound of the approaching engine, just motionless, as if waiting. Mr. Lau pulled the minibus to a gentle stop beside her, sliding the door open with a mechanical hiss. She turned slowly, revealing a face so pale it almost reflected the dim interior lights. Her expression was unreadable, eyes dark and unblinking. She didn't speak as she stepped inside, the faint scent of damp earth following her. She moved toward the back, choosing the seat directly behind him, unusual for a nearly empty bus. Mr. Lau kept his eyes forward, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. As the bus pulled away, the silence pressed in. He adjusted the rearview mirror casually, but in the flickering reflection, the woman wasn't looking out the window or at her lap. She was staring directly at him. Her lips were moving, but there was no sound. Mr. Lau felt a prickle at the base of his neck. He cleared his throat and asked for her destination, but there was no reply. He glanced back, and she was gone. The seat was empty. Panic flared in his chest, but then something caught his eye. The fare box beside him now held a folded stack of paper. He reached for it, expecting bills. Instead, his fingers brushed the thin, brittle texture of something else entirely, yellowed sheets stamped with strange red symbols. Hell money. The bus rumbled on, the bridge disappearing into the fog behind him. But in the mirror, just for a heartbeat, he thought he saw her again, sitting in the same seat, smiling faintly. Mr. Lau's hands trembled slightly as he kept the bus moving forward, his eyes fixed on the ribbon of road ahead. He told himself he was imagining things, that fatigue and fog were playing tricks on him. But then, from behind, came the faint sound of footsteps on the aisle floor. Slow, deliberate, moving toward the front. He glanced in the mirror. The aisle was empty. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. He gripped the wheel tighter, deciding not to look again. But the footsteps came once more, this time stopping right beside him, followed by the softest whisper, a single word he couldn't quite catch. Before he could react, headlights flared in the distance. Another minibus was approaching from the opposite direction. As they passed, the other driver's face twisted in alarm. He flashed his high beams twice, then rolled down his window and shouted something over the roar of the engines. Mr. Lau only caught fragments. Bridge, not safe, don't stop. The warning clung to him like the damp air. Why would another driver say that now, after he'd already crossed? His thoughts were interrupted by a faint tapping on the glass beside him. He turned his head sharply, but there was no one there, just the darkness of the roadside trees sliding past. That was when he noticed the smell, not the damp earth from before, but something older, heavier, the faint metallic tang of river water mixed with decay. He glanced into the rearview mirror again, heart pounding. The woman was back. She sat in the same seat, hair hanging forward like a curtain, her face obscured. In her lap was a small bundle wrapped in soaked cloth. Water dripped steadily from it onto the floor, each drop impossibly loud in the silence. Mr. Lau opened his mouth to speak, but the bus lights flickered violently, plunging the interior into near darkness for a split second. When they steadied, the seat was empty again, but the puddle of water remained. The road stretched ahead, silent except for the hum of the engine, and in the mirror, the cloth bundle now rested on the seat where she had been, still dripping. Mr. Lau's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel as he forced himself to keep driving, but his eyes kept darting to the mirror. The soaked bundle still sat there, glistening under the weak interior lights, each drop hitting the floor with an unnatural rhythm, slow, deliberate, almost like a heartbeat. Then, without warning, the bundle shifted. Just a twitch at first, as though something inside was moving. The bus swerved slightly as Mr. Lau's focus broke. He slammed the brakes, the vehicle lurching to a stop in the middle of the desolate road. The hum of the engine filled the silence until it didn't. Without him touching anything, the engine sputtered and died, leaving only the sound of dripping water. The puddle was spreading now, reaching slowly toward his feet. He turned in his seat, heart pounding, and saw her standing in the aisle. No sound, no movement, except the slow lifting of her head. Her hair clung to her wet face, and in the dim light he saw her eyes, sunken, dark, and fixed on him with a hollow intensity that made the air feel thinner. She stepped closer, water pooling with every barefoot step. Her lips moved again, the same silent words from before, but now he could hear them. Just 3 syllables, repeated over and over in a rasping whisper. Bring them back. Before he could speak, she bent toward the dripping bundle, unwrapping it with trembling, pale hands. Inside was a child's shoe, small, muddy, and impossibly old. Mr. Lau's breath caught in his throat. The air grew heavy, pressing down on him until every instinct screamed to run. But he couldn't move. Not when she began to smile, and the reflection in the mirror showed more figures now, dozens of pale faces gathering silently in the rows behind her. Mr. Lau's breath came in shallow bursts, his eyes locked on the crowd of pale faces filling the bus. They didn't speak, didn't blink, only stared at him with the same hollow gaze. The woman stood at the center, cradling the small shoe like something sacred. Her voice broke the silence, barely louder than the rain beginning to patter against the roof. She told him of the night in 1955 when the flood came without warning. Teachers and children, swept away in the darkness, their cries swallowed by the river's roar. Their bodies were never all recovered. Some, she said, had been waiting ever since. Mr. Lau's mind spun. The hell money in the fare box, the puddles that wouldn't dry, the whispers from the aisle. It all pointed back to them, to the bridge. They hadn't just been haunting it. They had been searching. Bring them back, she repeated, her eyes glistening now, though no tears fell. He realized she wasn't asking for herself. She was speaking for all of them. The lights flickered again, and for a moment the scene shifted. The bus was gone, replaced by rushing black water all around him, the sound deafening. He saw hands reaching out from the depths, small voices calling for help. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. The woman's face was inches from his now. They can't leave until they're found, she whispered. And then, in a blink, the bus was empty. No dripping water, no bundle, no shoe, only the faint scent of river mud lingering in the air. Mr. Lau sat frozen, understanding just enough to know the truth. Mang Gui Kiu wasn't simply cursed. It was holding on to something, or someone, and they weren't ready to let go. The engine roared back to life without him turning the key. The sudden vibration jolted Mr. Lao from his frozen state, and the bus lurched forward on its own, rolling away from the bridge as if guided by unseen hands. He gripped the wheel, more out of instinct than control, watching the fog swallow Mang Gui Kiu behind him. The road ahead was empty, the night silent once more. But when he glanced at the fare box, his stomach twisted. The hell money was gone, replaced by a neat row of small, mud-caked shoes, all different sizes, all impossibly old. His breath caught as he scanned the rearview mirror. For a heartbeat, every seat was full again, pale faces watching him in perfect stillness. Then, in the next blink, they were gone. Only the faint sound of dripping water remained, echoing somewhere deep inside the bus. Mang Gui Kiu isn't the only place in Hong Kong where the line between the living and the dead feels dangerously thin. Stories like that travel fast, whispered between night shift drivers and hikers on lonely trails. And if you head deeper into the new territories, past the busy roads and into the hills, you'll find another name spoken with the same uneasy caution, solo pun. An entire village left to rot, its wooden beams sagging, its walls swallowed by vines. But the strangest thing? Every compass that enters its boundaries simply stops. No spinning, no pointing north, just dead still, as if the village itself refuses to let you find your way. Some say it's magnetic interference. Others think it's something else entirely. Either way, the silence there feels heavy. And it's waiting. The path to Solo Pun was barely visible now, choked by overgrown grass and twisted roots that seemed to reach for the ankles of anyone foolish enough to pass. May, an avid solo hiker with a taste for exploring forgotten places, had heard about the village for years. Most people dismissed it as just another abandoned settlement, but the strange compass stories always stuck in her mind. She'd laughed them off, until today, when she decided to see it for herself. The air grew heavier, the deeper she walked, the sounds of the forest fading until only her footsteps remained. Roofs sagged under the weight of neglect, and doorways yawned open like the mouths of something long dead. She paused to check her compass, a habit drilled into her from countless hikes, but this time the needle didn't move. It didn't even twitch. She tapped the glass, shook it lightly. Nothing. The red arrow hung lifelessly in place, as if frozen in time. A shiver traced her spine. She tried her phone's GPS, but the screen spun endlessly, unable to fix her location. Still, she pushed on, telling herself it was just a fluke. After all, people had lived here once. Families, children. The walls might be crumbling, but they couldn't hurt her. Yet, the deeper she moved into Solo Pun, the more she felt it, a subtle pull, as though the village itself was watching. And the strange thing was, every step forward felt just a little harder to turn back from. May wandered deeper into the village, her boots crunching over brittle leaves and broken tiles. The buildings around her leaned with age, their wooden beams split and weathered. A faded sign hung loosely from rusted nails, its lettering barely legible. She paused at the threshold of what had once been a home, peering inside. The room was bare, except for an overturned table and a scattering of bowls, their rims chipped but still resting where they'd fallen decades ago. She stepped inside, running her fingers along the cracked wall, when a sudden sound broke the stillness, a faint creak, like footsteps on old floorboards. She froze, straining to listen. The air was thick, and every sound seemed amplified, yet there was nothing now but silence. Pushing the thought aside, she decided to mark her way back. She pulled a small roll of bright tape from her pack, tying it to a splintered beam before moving on. But when she turned the next corner, her steps faltered. The tape was already there, fluttering gently from another beam ahead of her, the exact same piece she had tied moments ago. She frowned, scanning her surroundings. Maybe she'd circled back without realizing, but her compass, still lifeless in her pocket, offered no reassurance. A shadow shifted at the edge of her vision. She whipped her head around, but saw only the swaying of leaves through a collapsed wall. The breeze carried a faint scent of smoke, like a fire long extinguished. She pressed forward, telling herself she was imagining it, until she found another house, its doorway blocked by a crooked wooden frame. Hanging from it was a string of weathered paper charms, their edges burnt and their ink faded. She reached out, curious, but the moment her fingers brushed the brittle paper, a sudden rush of cold air swept through the doorway, snuffing out the light in the narrow beam of her headlamp for just a heartbeat. When it flickered back, the doorway was empty. But the scent of smoke was stronger now, and somewhere in the distance, a faint, rhythmic tapping began, slow, steady, and getting closer. The tapping grew louder, echoing unnaturally between the ruined walls. May's instinct screamed at her to turn back, but curiosity anchored her in place. She moved toward the sound, stepping carefully over fractured stone. Each tap was evenly spaced, deliberate, like someone using a cane or striking wood against the ground. As she rounded a corner, she froze. An elderly man stood at the far end of the alley, dressed in a loose, faded tunic that looked decades out of place. His back was to her, one hand clutching a long wooden stick. He tapped it once more before turning slowly. His eyes locked onto hers, and something in his gaze made her skin crawl, not malice, but an unsettling stillness, as if he were seeing straight through her. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and strained. "This place doesn't let go." Before she could speak, he lifted his stick and pointed deeper into the village. "Follow that path and you won't come back." She took a step toward him, wanting answers, but the air seemed to shimmer around him like heat haze. In the blink of an eye, he was gone. The tapping stopped. Her heart hammered. Maybe she'd imagined him. But when she glanced at the dirt where he had stood, she saw fresh footprints leading away, except they didn't fade into the distance. They simply ended, as if the man had vanished mid-step. May pressed on, unsettled but unwilling to turn back without seeing more. That was when she noticed something strange on the walls of the next building, symbols etched deep into the wood, circling the doorway. The carvings looked rushed, uneven, but they all pointed inward, toward the house's dark interior. She stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of charred wood. Her headlamp beam caught a series of objects on the floor, broken compasses, each one with its needle locked in place, all pointing toward the same corner of the room. And from that corner, the rhythmic tapping began again. This time, it was inside with her. The tapping was so close now that May could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. Her headlamp trembled in her grip as she turned it toward the dark corner. The beam caught only shadows at first, jagged shapes formed by collapsed beams and fallen plaster. Then something shifted. A figure emerged slowly from the darkness. It wasn't the elderly man. This one was shorter, thinner, and the outline of a child. Its head was tilted slightly, strands of hair falling across its face. In one pale hand, it held a broken compass, the needle fixed in place. With the other, it tapped a long splinter of wood against the floor in perfect rhythm. May's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to ask if the child was lost, but the words stuck. The child's head twitched at an unnatural angle, and in the silence that followed the last tap, May realized something. She hadn't heard a single breath. Then the child stepped forward, and the light from her headlamp passed over its face. The skin was ashen, the lips tinged blue, and the eyes, they didn't reflect the light at all. The air grew colder, her breath now visible in front of her. The child raised the compass and held it out toward her, the needle unmoving. Then, in a voice so faint she could barely hear it, it whispered, "Still here." Before May could react, the room around her seemed to shift. She was no longer standing in a decayed house. She was surrounded by walls still intact, the scent of fresh smoke heavy in the air, faint cries echoing from outside. In the window, she saw orange light flickering, fire. And then, just as quickly, she was back in the rotting house. But the child was gone. Only the broken compass lay in the dust at her feet, its needle locked in place. May crouched down, picking up the broken compass with shaking hands. The metal was icy cold, far colder than the air around her. As she turned it over, she noticed faint scratches along the back, not random marks, but deliberate carvings. The characters were old, weathered, but she could just make out their meaning, Stay away. Her mind reeled. The frozen needles, the strange symbols carved into the doorways, the elderly man's warning. It all pointed to something more than just magnetic interference. This place wasn't keeping people out, it was keeping something in. A sudden movement in the doorway made her flinch. The old man was there again, leaning heavily on his stick, his face drawn with exhaustion. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked quietly. May hesitated, then nodded. "They've been here since the fire," he said. "Trapped. The land, it doesn't let them go. The compasses, that's just the way you know you've stepped into their world." She wanted to ask what happened, why the fire started, but his eyes darkened. "Some answers you don't want. Leave while you still can." Before she could respond, he turned and walked down the alley. She followed, but when she stepped outside, the path was empty. Only her own footprints marked the dust. Clutching the compass, she glanced toward the forest. For the first time since arriving, she felt the pull in her chest loosen, as if the village itself had momentarily released its grip. But behind her, from somewhere deep in Solo Pun, the tapping began again. May realized then that the village wasn't abandoned at all. It was still full, just not with the living, and they didn't want her to find the way out. May didn't wait. She turned toward the overgrown path and pushed through the tangled brush, the broken compass clenched tightly in her hand. Every step away from the village felt lighter, but the tapping followed, faint at first, then growing louder, as if pacing her from just beyond the trees. She forced herself not to look back. The forest opened slightly, and through the mist she saw the faint outline of the trailhead. Relief surged through her until she noticed the tape. The bright strip she'd tied earlier was fluttering in the breeze, on the beam of a crumbling house. Her chest tightened. She wasn't at the edge of the forest at all. She was back inside the village. The tapping stopped. Somewhere behind her, a child's voice whispered, soft and close to her ear, "Still here." 2 haunted places, 2 warnings ignored. Mang Gui Kiu kept its lost passengers, and Solo Pun held onto the souls of a burned village. But there's one more place where the dead refuse to be forgotten, and this one was meant for children. In Pingshan, the Tat Tak School once echoed with laughter and lessons, until its doors closed in 1998. Since then, it's become a dare for thrill seekers and a nightmare for those who enter. They say the spirit of the headmistress still walks the halls, dressed in red, the color of vengeance in Chinese lore. Some claim she whispers to you, others say she watches, and if you're unlucky enough, you might just see her standing in the doorway before the lights go out. The rusted gate of Tat Tak School groaned as Aaron pushed it open, the sound echoing down the weed-choked path. He'd come here on a dare, his phone ready to record every moment for his friends. The air was thick and still, carrying the faint scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. The main building loomed ahead, its windows dark and empty, some cracked like spiderwebs, faded paint peeled from the walls, revealing the bare concrete underneath. Aaron stepped inside, his shoes crunching over scattered debris, broken desks, torn exercise books, and chalk dust that clung to the air like ghostly powder. He made his way down the main corridor, pausing to peer into classrooms. Most were empty, but in one, tiny chairs sat neatly in rows, as if waiting for students who would never return. A faint draft brushed the back of his neck. He turned, but the hallway was empty. The dare was simple. Walk to the far end of the school, find the old bathroom, and film inside. That was where, according to the stories, the headmistress had taken her life. The thought made him smirk. Ghosts didn't scare him. But as he approached the staircase, something odd caught his attention. A single shoe lay at the bottom step. It was a child's shoe, worn and faded, its laces frayed. He nudged it gently with his foot, and it tipped over, spilling a fine layer of dust. Shrugging it off, he started climbing. Halfway up, a sound drifted from above, faint, deliberate tapping, like someone pacing slowly in hard-soled shoes. He paused, listening. The tapping stopped. Aaron exhaled, forcing a laugh, but when he reached the landing, his phone screen flickered. The camera app froze for a moment, and in that brief distortion, he thought he saw the outline of a woman standing at the end of the hallway, her head tilted slightly, her robe a deep, unnatural shade of red. When the screen cleared, the hallway was empty. Only the faint smell of perfume lingered, cloying and out of place in the stale air. Aaron shook off the image, telling himself it was just the phone glitching, but the perfume lingered in the air as he moved deeper into the hallway. The classrooms here were darker, their doors hanging loosely on rusted hinges. His footsteps echoed unnaturally, as though the sound was coming from more than one direction at once. He reached the door to the old bathroom and found it slightly ajar. A thin strip of darkness leaked through the gap, deeper than the shadows of the hallway. Before he could push it open, a sudden voice behind him made him freeze. "You shouldn't be here." He spun around. A girl stood a few feet away, no older than 16, her school uniform faded and torn. She wasn't holding a phone, a flashlight, or anything at all. Her skin was pale. And her eyes, they didn't seem to focus on him, but rather through him. Aaron managed a nervous laugh. "Yeah? Why's that?" Her lips parted slightly, but instead of an answer, she whispered something under her breath. Too soft to make out. She raised one trembling hand and pointed toward the bathroom door. "She doesn't like visitors." Before he could speak, the girl turned and walked away, her footsteps making no sound on the dusty floor. He followed her with his eyes until she disappeared around a corner. When he turned back to the bathroom, the door was now wide open. Inside, a single dim light bulb swung gently from the ceiling, though there was no wind. The stalls were mostly open, save for one at the far end, its door shut tight. The smell of perfume was stronger now, almost suffocating. Aaron stepped inside, his phone raised, recording. The light flickered, and for a split second, in the gap beneath the closed stall door, he saw the hem of a red robe swaying gently, as if someone inside was hanging just above the floor. His phone buzzed violently in his hand, and the recording app crashed. The bathroom went silent, except for the faint creak of a rope tightening somewhere above him. Aaron's pulse hammered in his ears as he stared at the closed stall. The swaying hem of the red robe was still visible, its fabric rippling ever so slightly in the still air. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Hello? Are you—" No answer. The rope creaked again, a slow, deliberate groan that seemed to reverberate through the walls. He took a cautious step closer, filming again despite the cold sweat running down his back. His flashlight beam jittered across the tiles until it hit the stall door, and that's when he noticed it. The hinges weren't rusted. They were bent, warped outward, as if the door had been forced shut from the inside with unnatural strength. Aaron's breath quickened. He reached out and pushed on the door. It didn't budge, but then it pushed back. A sudden, violent slam rattled the entire stall. The rope groaned loudly, and from inside came a sound that froze him where he stood, a low, wet gasp, followed by a whisper, too close, as if spoken directly into his ear. "Stay with me." The light bulb above flickered wildly, and for a split second, the mirror opposite the stalls lit up. Aaron's own reflection stared back at him, but he wasn't alone. Standing behind him in the reflection was a tall woman, her long black hair matted, her red robe soaked in dark stains. Her head lolled to one side at an impossible angle, and her eyes were locked onto his. He spun around, but the bathroom was empty. The stall door now hung wide open, swinging slightly on its bent hinges. Inside, there was no rope, no robe, just the faint scent of perfume, and a single red thread lying across the floor. Aaron crouched down, picking up the red thread between his fingers. It was damp, leaving a faint crimson smear across his skin. He stared at it, his thoughts racing. The legends had always said the headmistress wore red when she died, but they never said why. A faint shuffle behind him made him freeze. Turning slowly, he saw the same schoolgirl from before standing in the doorway, her gaze fixed on the thread in his hand. "She wants you to remember her," the girl said softly. Her voice was steady now, more focused, but her eyes still had that distant glaze. Aaron swallowed. "What happened here?" The girl's expression tightened, as though she was weighing how much to reveal. She said finally. And no one stopped it. She wore red so she wouldn't pass in peace, so everyone would see. Her gaze shifted toward the stall, and Aaron followed it. For a moment, he saw it again. The robe swaying, the rope tightening. But when he blinked, it was gone. "She doesn't like visitors," the girl repeated, her tone colder now. "But she hates being forgotten even more." Aaron felt the air around him grow heavier, pressing in on his chest. The perfume returned, stronger than ever, curling through the room like smoke. When he looked back at the doorway, the girl was gone. Only her words lingered in his head, looping over and over. It wasn't just a haunting. This was a memory being kept alive, whether the living wanted it or not, and by stepping inside, he had become part of it. Aaron backed out of the bathroom, the red thread still clinging to his fingers no matter how hard he tried to drop it. The hallway felt darker now, the air thicker, each step heavier than the last. He reached the staircase and took them two at a time, desperate to get out. But as he pushed open the front door, he froze. Outside, the schoolyard was no longer overgrown. The grass was short, the paint on the buildings fresh. Children's voices echoed through the air, their laughter sharp and clear. At the far end of the yard, a woman in a red robe stood perfectly still, her face hidden by her hair. Slowly, she lifted her head and smiled. Aaron blinked, and the yard was empty again. The building was rotting, the air silent. Only the faint scent of perfume followed him all the way to the gate. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you like them and want to listen to more, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload at least 3 times a week. Wish you all the best.